Hey, welcome to Ed, a podcast about the teaching life. This is Conversation 74, and I'm your host, Shane Lawrence. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. And this week, I am joined by international teacher George Evans. Right on. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, thanks for joining me this early morning. It's 6:30 where you are, approximately?
Yeah, it's around 6:30.
Wow. Well, how's your morning been so far?
Yeah, so far so good. I like getting up early in the morning and just getting a nice early start to the day.
Yeah, well, I can tell. I mean, holy smokes, it's 6:30 in the morning. I mean, I know we just turned the video off, but like you're wearing a suit at 6:30.
Hey, man. I try to model. We're trying to get our students right now to wear blazers, and nobody wants to wear a blazer. And I try to tell them, look, it's okay to look fly.
How does that translate?
Actually, it's funny, man. Like I've gotten almost all of them wearing blazers now.
Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, we have one student at our school, and for the longest time, he always comes to school dressed in like a full suit, tie, everything. But actually, this year he's decided he's going to start to change up his style, so he's a little more casual.
Nice.
Still more dressed up than 98% of the school. But yeah, it's a little sad to see the suit go for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So are you okay? It's so easy just to seg into these things, but maybe we'll just kind of we'll take a step back here from what. And George, why don't you just give me a quick little sort of preview of what it is that you actually do?
Sure. I teach at an IB World School here in Numazu, Japan, and I teach English B, and I teach language and literature. So it's secondary English. I also teach a humanities class.
Okay. And are you teaching like nationals or expats or what's your student body like?
So when I first started my international career, I was teaching mostly expats, but the school I'm at now is a bilingual school. So it's pretty much, I would say about 70% national population, about 30% international population. And the school that I work at, it's really interesting because we have a bilingual program within a bigger program, which is like a regular side national program. So it's kind of a school within a school. So all of my students, I would say about 80% of them are English language learners.
Wow. Well, and is that sort of the thrust of your wait a minute, that came out totally wrong. Wow. So you've got ELLs. I mean, how much does that impact what you do then on a day-to-day basis?
Everything. It impacts everything. I mean, yeah, it has to, because otherwise, if I didn't impact the way I taught, because of the student population I had, one, I wouldn't be a very good teacher, but two, they wouldn't really understand what we're doing. So you have to give them something to hold on to, I think, when you're teaching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's start there then. What do you give your students to hold on to?
Well, typically I give them some kind of scaffold. Probably, I think one of my biggest mentors, Kelly Gallagher, he was a writing teacher. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aware of him. He's an English guy. He said probably one of the most important things that you can do for writing, which is probably one of the most complex things we ask students to do, is just to write in front of students while kind of talking out loud. And so I do that all the time. I model explicitly what I'm looking for and the process behind it, which I think is almost as important or more important than the end product, because it's important for my students to see that this doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's a messy process, and it's difficult, and there are certain things that we're looking for, but the process is really important. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what I start with my students. I give them lots of academic sentence frames and templates and things like that, but really we want to get beyond that, and we want to get them kind of creating on their own, and for them to watch me, I think is really powerful.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it brings to mind one of my own memories, which is actually just from last year of, I was working on the school musical, and it's not your typical school musical. Like it's a beast. It's huge. and they bring in, a really great lighting director. And I was chatting with him just between shows, and he was still tweaking his show, and he started, working on his lighting, but he was telling me what he was doing and why he was doing it. And I mean, that's when you start making those connections, right? Because it's so, it's one thing to look at it and say, okay, so I know that, subject, verb, object, whatever, grammar. But if you know why someone is doing something, I mean, that bridges a really big gap.
I agree. I totally agree. There's kind of a divide in our school from the, I guess, regular side of school, which is the national side, and the bilingual program. And what you said in terms of grammar and specific skills is the main divide. They still learn English in the national side, but a lot of it's isolated skills. And isolated skills, I think, are important to a degree, but what I try to do in my classes is build knowledge, overall background knowledge, just about in English, about the culture and the IB is really interested in kind of Western culture, but just in general, the more words that we can get them to read and understand and be exposed to, the better. And so I think it's a longer process, and it doesn't have immediate payoff. But I think in terms of the long-term flourishing of students, I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is kind of an additional challenge for you because I mean, or maybe I'm assuming here, are you trained as an ELL teacher, or is this just something that's extra because of your situation?
So I did take some training for ELL, and I've done a lot of self-training as well, just because I think that that's really important. I mean, a lot of us are going to be put in situations as teachers where we didn't get it, even through our educational programs. As good as they are, sometimes they can't do it all, and so we have to take ownership of our own learning and kind of figure out what the best way to help the learners in our room at this time is. And so, yeah, I had some training, but I've done a lot of self-training as well.
And what do you found has been the sort of the most effective resource if people are looking for maybe some additional help?
The main thing I found for English language learners is actually, and this is kind of I don't want to say it's a cop out, but it's good instruction in general. You should be doing a lot of these things. You should be writing in front of, if you're an English teacher, I think, this is my opinion, of course, but I think you should be writing in front of students anyway. I think you should be explicit with your instruction, with what you're looking for. I think you should be giving them exact templates of what you're looking for and exemplars and things like that. And be just very, very explicit with what you're looking for. I guess the main book that I really found helpful was just my main educational book of all time, which is Mike Schmoker's Focus.
Focus. I actually haven't heard of that one. So how did you actually wind up teaching in Japan? I mean, that's a bit of a leap.
Yeah, sure. So basically it all comes down to when you're younger, you kind of want to change the world. And I was in a degree program for political science, and I was going to go to law school. And something about that just didn't seem right with me. And I started kind of volunteering at my local elementary and middle school. And an opportunity presented itself to go to Thailand. And so this is pre-certification. I jumped at it, and I went and I taught in Thailand for a year. And I loved it. It kind of like when I thought about changing the world, I think a lot of the times you have to change what's right in front of you. And Thailand wasn't right in front of me, but the students were. And so like you see every day tangible results and see like the impact that you can make on students. And so then I knew it was like for me. And I also knew that I liked the idea of traveling abroad just because different cultures, different students, different life. And so I knew that I wanted to do that. And after I went back to America to get my certification, I I went and served in Korea for 2 years, and I did that at an international school there. And I ended up in Japan. Just kind of happened that way. Didn't really plan it that way, but it just kind of happened.
Wow. So are you, if it's not too personal, can I ask, I mean, are you fairly unencumbered? Are you married? That kind of thing?
Well, my wife's a teacher at the same school that I teach, and we actually Thailand and Korea and Japan together.
Okay.
And it's kind of what we're doing as a couple.
Right. Well, it's funny. You're actually the third international teacher I've talked to in the last little while here. And it's funny, they're all the same situation. You've all gone, you're married to another teacher and you just kind of travel around the world doing your thing. That's really cool.
It's a great life. That's for sure.
That's awesome. So you spoke about changing the world. And I love what you said. Yeah. You said, if you want to change the world, you need to change what's right in front of you. And for you, that was your students. So how do you do that? How do you go about doing that with your kids?
I think that the main thing, Shane, I think is if you can really get the students to understand that they have to take ownership of their learning and of their lives. And some of them might be in difficult situations, and I know it's not easy. And I know it's kind of cliche to say you have to take ownership or responsibility. But the ones that really internalize that, if we can build that in students, then almost all the hard work for us is done. It's all downhill from there. I think building that ownership is incredibly important. And if that's like one of my number one goals, actually. If I can build ownership in students, then the rest of it, they'll want to come to me, and everything will just be a lot easier. So I think if you can change the world, just by showing people how much power they have innately in themselves.
Yeah, the whole idea of self-efficacy. I love that term. I don't think it gets thrown around often enough.
Sure, absolutely.
So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, if I heard myself say this a few years ago, I might have like a counter argument and say, look, George, there are people in difficult situations, and you can't say that everyone has ownership. They don't have power over themselves. And look, I'm not saying that everyone's in a great situation and everyone has complete control over every aspect of their lives. But I am saying is if you don't have ownership, if you try to blame others, you're never going to see how much agency you have. You're always going to be looking for something else, and it's just going to get in the way, even if you are in a difficult situation.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I would love for my students to have more ownership of their learning, a little more, just acknowledgement that they have their own, their ability to solve their own problems in a lot of cases. Because anyway, I feel like all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I can see the soapbox in front of me, so I'm going to give you the soapbox. So, how do you? How do you help students come along on that journey towards that self-efficacy, ownership? All right, we're going to get back to me and George in a second, but first I want to tell you about the Otherwise podcast. It's a show dedicated to empowering diverse communities living on Treaty 6 territory by sharing stories of our lived experiences. The show strives to highlight our collective ethno-cultural linguistic diversity and heritage, reflect who we are as a city, and bring about positive social change. If you want to know more about the show, you can head over to otherwiseshow.com. All right, let's get back to me and George. So, how do you? How do you help students come along on that journey towards that self-efficacy, ownership?
Well, it's a process, especially here in Japan, because the society is very deferential to leadership and authority, and I think it takes time. But it's one of those things where I try to tell students, look, if you sit there quietly and respectfully, and you aren't thinking, you're being disrespectful to yourself. Like it's disrespect. It's just, I want you to be actively thinking and not passively regurgitating what I say. And a lot of the time students have trouble with that because up until high school or whatever, they can get away with just sitting there and being polite, and it doesn't work. Not to get better, And so we talk a lot of the work that we do this is the same for teachers. I think for anybody is internal work.
Okay. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. So the students have to have a reason why they're there. They have to have a reason, and they have to explicitly visualize that reason. They have to explicitly understand, why are we wasting our time, or are we? Mm-hmm. Or what are we doing here? What is our purpose? We have to have clarity of purpose. It's not enough just to sit there and say, I want to be polite and kind of get along. For some people it will be, but the majority of, I want to try to pull them along so they can see that, especially for my students here, getting a good understanding of English could change their life. I mean, they could meet their future partner. They could go abroad and get a job that they wouldn't have otherwise. Mm-hmm. Whatever their why is, it's really important that they cultivate that and understand that's why they're doing it. And so when it gets hard, they can go back to that and not just, have a mindset that's not like a growth mindset. They'll have sometimes these students, they give up. And so we want to keep pushing them to understand why they're here.
Mm-hmm. So what's your why?
My why is I'd like to gently guide the students in my room to become better people, writers, readers, thinkers, speakers. And the reason I want to do that is because I think that education is a vital aspect of democracy. And I kind of feel like if we're going to change societies, we have to really start with education. We have to have people that go into the world who have empathy and who have an understanding of the importance of some of these institutions that are kind of beleaguered at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's kind of how we initially, bonded on Twitter. That's a terrible choice of words. How we connected on Twitter. That's better. The idea that, that the institution is in need of some change. I mean, what do you see that's sort of in need of fixing?
So I'd like to speak mostly about American education, but to be honest with you, I'm in a lot of Twitter chats, and the Australians, the UK, it seems like everyone is having some similar problems right now. I don't think a lot of these institutions, I think they're kind of, they've lost their coherence of purpose. They don't know why they're there. And so this is a real problem because if you don't know why you're there, then you're going to always be disappointing a group that thinks that you should be doing what they think. And so I think the main thing that at least American education should probably be doing is focusing a bit more on why it's there. And I think the main thing that we should be doing is graduating students who are competent and ready to analytically read, be able to critically think, analyze, and think heavily about different kinds of texts and media, and go out into the world and be ready to either flourish in whatever job they choose or a university setting. But I think we're doing too much in a way. We have to focus. I mean, whenever you're on Twitter, you see these, and this is, I don't know if Twitter should be the.
Let's just beat it into the ground.
I don't know if Twitter should be the other that we use here, but it's kind of indicative of a larger issue.
Yeah,
there's so many competing interests. I mean, teach like a pirate. That's fine. I'm not. Let me preface this. I think all of this is great. I think that everyone's trying to be helpful and genuine, and I think that they're doing their very best to actually fill an area of need. But I also think that sometimes when you have competing interests or different ideas about education and about what it should look and sound like, you kind of get into this situation where it's quite difficult to make progress or to know why you're there. And so should education be about, PBL, or should it be about project-based learning, inquiry-based learning? Should it be about social emotional learning? Should it be about teaching different ways of math, or should it be about flipped learning or ed tech, or all these things, or podcasts in the classroom and movie making? And you got to make sure that you do all these things. I feel like sometimes we forget that, at least in America, a lot of students have a hard time reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I like this. This is kind of making my brain go a little crazier now. I feel the same way in a lot of ways. And again, nothing against Teach Like a Pirate. I actually had Dave Burgess on the show a while back, so gotta.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great. No, I'm not. I like Teach Like a Pirate. I'm part of their chats. They're great people. But
oh yeah.
But if you lose sight
mm-hmm.
of literacy, and it's difficult.
Yeah, well, I read one of your most recent blog post as well, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But just the thing that caught my eye again is that idea that we can get overwhelmed so easily with, like you say, all these different approaches. And you're just, the ones you mentioned cover a lot of ground, but that really still only just scratches the surface. There's so many different approaches, and I don't know about you. Maybe you can speak to this, but for myself, I see all these teachers doing these amazing things. I'm like, oh, I need to do gamification, or I need to do some really hardcore PBL, or I need to do more work on literacy, and it's just, you tear yourself in apart trying to go in all these different ways, and there's no way you can possibly fill the room with all these different things.
For sure. I really fight against that with myself. I think a lot of it's because we care a lot and we want to make sure that we're doing what's best for our students. Mm-hmm. But I think, just as I talked to you about how my students really have to have a concrete and explicit why, I told you my why was to make better readers, writers, thinkers, and people. If I'm not doing one of those things, we don't have time to do everything. So I have to make sure that I'm pushing my students in one of those directions. Mm. I think, look at it from like a student's point of view. I try to do this a lot. I think it's really valuable, and we don't do it enough. But sometimes if we're just jumping from one thing to the next, there's kind of an incoherence there of instruction if you're a student.
Yeah. It's too easy to switch gears all the time, and then you never really accomplish anything.
Yeah, it's hard. It's difficult to go really in depth, which I think is really important. I think sometimes we want to cover content, and I said this previously in one of my videos, and someone had asked me, it's like, aren't we supposed to cover content? And I said yes, but that's not the number one goal. I think it's more important to go deep. I think building knowledge and going really deep is important. And I don't think we have enough opportunities to do that. And I think the reason is because we only have so many minutes in the day, and it's kind of a zero-sum game. Whatever you do takes time away from something else. And so we have to make these decisions. And so I always think about it. It's like, if I'm going to do this really cool thing that's like gamification or something, what am I taking away? And I'll tell you what I'm taking away. It's time in class to read.
Mm-hmm. So your argument would be that we need to focus more on the basics then?
100%. I think even the basics can be a little dicey. I think a lot of what we should do should be research informed. And I look at things like Hattie's visible learning list, where he talks about the effect sizes and things like that. Overall effect sizes are important, I think. So we have to make sure that we're doing what has the most bang for the buck. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for sure, I think basics are helpful. And I'll put it to you this way: we never have a lot of PD or in-servicing or even Twitter chats on the gradual release of responsibility model, which has a lot of evidence behind it.
Mm. Sounds like it's time for a new Twitter chat. New
hashtag. I think it's indicative of just like, it's boring. We know it. We're not gonna beat that to the ground. But how have we mastered it? Has everyone mastered it? Is everyone good with that? Do we check for understanding between each small chunk of learning? Have we looked at how to take a lesson plan and make sure that we are looking at each aspect of it and doing a task analysis to see how much you need to know before you move to the next step?
Whew. Probably not.
It's hard. Yeah, I mean, if you're doing other stuff, it's hard. It's difficult that way. I mean, and sometimes we can get a little off track sometimes. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think having a diversity of thought is really important, but this is my argument to put into the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, no, I like, there's not a lot of people out there arguing for simplicity. So I like that voice. That's nice. And even getting back to what you said earlier, I mean, your why has to do with building readers, writers, and thinking people. I mean, that's such an easy metric, right? Regardless of what your content is, regardless of how you present it, if you can just say, okay, is it hitting one of those purposes that I have for being here? Am I making readers? Am I making writers? Am I making thinking people? And if you're not, it's a pretty easy choice to cut it out.
It is.
I like that. I like that a lot. Now, okay, you are building students who are purpose focused. Now, what are your thoughts then on, when they go out into the world? I mean, does this mean that you want them to be driven for further education, career focused, or like, what about the kids who just want to, head off to, I don't know, Europe and discover themselves for, 6 months? Is that counter to what you're trying to do, or does that dovetail with it?
So I take a lot of this from the great and powerful Dave Stewart Jr., who is an awesome person and a great, he's a great English teacher and author, and he uses this term called long-term flourishing. And I like it a lot because it tells us that we want students to flourish, to do really well in their lives, but it's not specific, meaning like whatever they want to do, I'm cool with. Whatever. If you want to go to Europe, if you want to go to work, if you want to go to university, who am I to say that's wrong? I think all of that's great. But whatever they choose, I would like them to have the ability to be successful at it. And so their success is my success in that way.
Would you say you're a pretty purpose-driven person yourself?
Yeah, I've done a lot of internal work on that, and I do think I have a pretty concrete why with pretty much everything I do. Because I tell you the truth, if you don't have that, it's like discipline's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline's not enough. I mean, you won't become disciplined. Like you'll lose your motivation, and you have to go back to it. I think you have to go back to why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, your why will stay there no matter how tired you get. You can write it on a Post-it and stick it in your wallet, right?
That's right. I do that.
Oh, I believe you. I've done the same thing, not with my why, but with other things that are just important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. You talked about the quote, almighty Dave Stewart Jr., which I just love that he's junior and he's almighty. But anyway, so, and I know you're reading a book by him called These 6 Things.
That's the only book I'm reading this entire year.
Okay. I'm glad you said that, because honestly, that just blows my mind. Is this a 2,000-page book, or are you just really getting into it, or what's that look like, reading one book for a year?
Well, I will put a caveat here. I do read fiction, but this is my only teacher book.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a 5,000-page book. It's just I'm trying to really internalize the things that are in the book. And I don't know about you, but I think a lot of this comes from a good place. We care a lot, so we're reading constantly. We're trying to find new strategies, new techniques, new different things to actually help us in our classroom and to help our students become productive members of society and learn. And all that's great, don't get me wrong. But when you hop from thing to thing, when you hop from book to book, from tweet to tweet, from article to article, from I shouldn't say this, podcast to podcast, right?
This is the only one anyone needs. It's all good.
Yes. But you lose depth and
Yeah.
you don't take action. And I think the main thing is new information is not action.
Okay, so that's just the sound of me absorbing. I like that. New information is not action. So what does action look like then?
Well, you have to do something, and you have to actually, I would say it's probably more important that you get your students to do something.
I like that. And it's interesting, just reflecting on the idea of just reading one book and then reflecting on it for the year. I mean, is your plan to just kind of just read it in one big chunk and then kind of go back to it? Or do you want to just read it, savor, read it, savor, read it? It's like, what's your plan? Because I'm really intrigued by this.
The plan is to take this book, and I've already kind of started with this. I have about 8 pages of notes right now for the first 2 chapters.
Uh-huh.
And the main thing is, what can I actually do? Like, what is this book asking me to do? Not just like reflecting on it. Reflection is good, but reflection should lead to action. So like, what am I actually going to do from this book? And so I'm just writing down what the actionable next steps to take from it.
Cool. Wow. Sorry. You've given me just so much to just sit here and think. I just want to kind of stare off into space for a while now and just be like, yeah. I like this idea. The book's called These 6 Things. Is this the first book you've read by him?
Yeah, I read his blog. He has one other book out as well called, oh man, I don't remember. It's about the Common Core, which is not as relevant to what I do, but his blog is really good as well.
All right. Well, I'm gonna check that out because I fall into that trap too, where it's just like I just need to read books, right? Just like put your head under the waterfall and just let it kind of wash over you. But I like the idea that you just need to just stop every now and then, just have a glass of water.
Yeah,
just have a glass of water, because boy, it sure is easy to get overwhelmed, right?
I don't think that could be overstated. I don't think what you just said can be overstated. Like you can't overstate the fact that it's easy to be overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. I think we can say it, but to really understand it means that I would almost equate it to the idea that when you say something to someone else, your message is not perfectly broadcast to them, right? So it's the same thing with our intentions and what we do in life. We can really plan for a lot of things, but I would say that not all of it realistically is ever going to get done. And so I think it's better to really have that in mind as you plan, and then focus on fewer things and make sure that those get done.
Yeah. I like that. And again, that goes kind of counter to the whole culture of just do all the time. This is just, take a step back, look at what works, do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right on. I feel like that's a great place to just kind of say we're done. That's great. George, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate this conversation. This has been really enlightening.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate talking to you this morning.
Oh, right on. Well, yeah, that's right. This morning. Thank you so much for that. Hey, before we go, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Probably the main thing that they can do is go on Twitter. My handle is @KRU Evans, Crew Evans, and that you can link up with me that way.
Perfect. And then that also has a link there for your blog and everything else.
Everything's right there. Yep.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks very much, George. And have a great day, man.
Hey, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, this episode of Ed is brought to you by the Well Endowed Podcast. It's a production of the Edmonton Community Foundation. And in their most recent episode, they talked with Nicole Smith about the Sage Seniors Association and some of the challenges that senior women in Edmonton are facing. They're also joined by the Edmonton Community Foundation CEO, Martin Garber-Conrad, who joined them to talk about giving during the holiday season and his approach to teaching one young person about philanthropy. If you want to hear the latest episode and read more about the Well Endowed Podcast, just head over to www.thewellendowedpodcast.com. And if you want to get in touch or you'd like to be a guest on this show, you can email me at theedpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter @theedpodcast. If you want to listen to more of Ed, you can head over to the website, theedpodcast.podbean.com, or find us in every single podcatcher known to personkind. Just search up Ed Conversations. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. You can find this and all other member podcasts at albertapodcastnetwork.com. Ed can also be heard on VoiceEd Radio. It's 24-hour internet broadcasting devoted to the best ideas in education. Just head over to voiced.ca. So, on behalf of myself and George, thanks very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.